we're back on track schedule-wise, so that's good. I'd like to welcome Adam Burnham from Accenture.
Thank you. Thanks, Malcolm. So it's not every day that you see Accenture and IBM getting along like we will today. We're obviously very fierce competitors in the marketplace, but as far as open source goes, we both have the same religion about this. And I think that one of the points that was made at the end of Harry's session about being an evangelist for going out and sharing success stories of open source, that is how we create more momentum and more success in the marketplace. You know, Accenture was an early adopter of open source principles as well, and we've been working with our partners, Red Hat and many others in the open source market to make this a success for a long time. And it's as much about us sharing these stories with the market as it is with IBM and others to create greater success. And we believe that in the long run, just as we heard from your folks from the European Commission, that it is going to help us generate the next wave of innovation, the next wave of wealth creation, the next wave of prosperity in our world. So we want open source to be very successful, and you'll see in Accenture's actions and what we do, and also with our colleagues from IBM, that we take that very seriously, and our commitment to open source is very strong. So I want to thank you for the invitation. It was, when Malcolm was talking earlier, he talked about there couldn't be two more different parties up on stage together. So for any of you that watch American television, there's a show called The Odd Couple. That's a little bit about what we are. In fact, I actually asked before I came here, should I wear my hoodie to this? Because I'm sure there's a few folks here that are doing that. Because my point of view is that although we are a very different culture, we're very different organizations, the work that we've done with Red Hat in the marketplace, the work that we've done contributing to open source and the types of challenges that we've solved together, it shows the true spirit of what our partnership is all about. And it's been a great 5 years, 10 years even, since our former alliance partnership has been formed. And we really have an amazing track record of success from that. Now today, what I wanted to do today was spend a few minutes talking about one of my favorite topics, which is dealing with enterprise-sized problems and what we call sort of application portfolio challenges. This is one of the true, difficult, really sticky issues that our enterprises are dealing with today. So what I'd like to share with you is a little story about how Accenture looks at open source and what we do in the open source market, and especially with things like cloud and others, to help us create a catalyst for fixing some of the most vexing problems that are out in the market. So let me start actually a little bit with about, who are these guys at Accenture? It's funny, it's remarkable how many times I speak to an audience and I just make an assumption that everybody here of course they know who Accenture is. The reality is that most of our clients are big Fortune 500, Fortune 2000 type organizations. And I fully recognize that a lot of the people that work in open source, that do things with open source, they don't necessarily run into us very much, unless of course they're using our hotel discount codes right now. So I thought it would be helpful to do that. Now, I don't want to make our marketing people nervous because we actually make our earnings announcement next week. So this will be the only details I'm going to share with you on Accenture. But we're a very large company. When I started with the firm, we actually had 20,000 employees, and now we're more than 250,000 employees around the world. We operate in 120 different countries, and we serve every imaginable Fortune 2000 client that's out there. We have 40,000 Java developers that work for us in various capacities, and architects and engineers and folks that are building things every day. We have literally hundreds, if not thousands of people that are contributing to different open source projects around the world. We have people that are committing changes into major initiatives that were sponsored originally by Spring and now are being adopted and embraced and used elsewhere. We've done some things with what we call this year the J Prize, which is one of the events that we held for our Java developers to challenge people to do something innovative on OpenShift and to use their Java skills to really show some pioneering and inspirational creativity. And the types of applications that we got from that were really just remarkable. I think that we actually want to try and commercialize one of them at this point. So I've talked to you about a little bit about Accenture and kind of what we are. So we're a big consultancy. We compete a lot with IBM. And some of the problems that we run into in the world are oftentimes created by companies like Accenture and IBM. So let me do that by just share a little bit about it and talk to you a little bit about who I am as well. So on this picture up here on the right, that's actually a diagram that I did of an enterprise architecture about 10 years ago. I'm not particularly proud of it, but there's probably plenty of engineers in this room that would, if they had a microscope and look at that, they'd probably snicker at a few of the decisions that I made along the way. But at the time, this was leading edge. This is the best possible solution that we could arrive at for this particular client. This particular architecture was something that was done, if I recall correctly, for a wholesale electricity market. And it was extremely complicated. There were a lot of moving parts inside of this. And it comes down to what we heard earlier about, geez, it's really hard to connect all these systems and make them interoperate with each other when they all have different standards they've adopted, when they all have different types of communication protocols that they use. And you know what? We end up with really hard-looking solutions like this to fix those problems. Well, that's been my job for many years, and about 10 years ago, I guess I had an epiphany, or maybe I got religion about doing things a little bit differently, and started adopting and embracing some of the more, we'll say, the more challenging standards, or the more leading-edge standards that allowed us to lead people away from building things like this. So I've been with Accenture a long time, 20 years now at this point. And my job in Accenture is probably one of the greatest ones that I could possibly imagine. In fact, I have some of my colleagues here in the room with me. What I'm responsible for now is emerging technology innovation. So I take and I get to look at what is happening in the disruptive technology market and what do we think that Accenture's clients are going to be using these disruptive technologies for in the future. What services and practice areas do we need to build in order to be able to help our pioneering clients do new things and new and different things in the market? So I'm able to use that. I'm able to use that as a springboard to be able to adopt open source in a much bigger way, to be able to do things with big data sooner and faster, so that when our clients come to us and ask us for help with a big data type problem or with adopting open source or migration to cloud, we have a point of view. And we've got expertise and capabilities to do that, albeit a nucleus a lot of times for some of the real leading edge stuff, but we have a point of view. And I have a couple of our experts here in the room who lead our practice areas for open source as well as for augmented reality. And this is the type of thing that we're passionate about at Accenture. It's not just being able to put in, SAP or Oracle systems at scale, and yes, we do a lot of that as well, but really being on the leading edge of technology. And a lot of that, we think, and a lot of this innovation that we think is going to come from open source. And that's exactly what I'm seeing, or overseeing our emerging technology group, is that a lot of this innovation is actually coming from open source type activity. So I have some other responsibilities in Accenture, being someone who's come from other roles. It's funny, I'm not very good about getting rid of my old responsibilities, but I collect some new ones. So I think eventually that's going to catch up with me. But one of the things that I've had an ownership for a long time is something called application modernization. Now, for many of you that perhaps work in organizations that have the benefit of being a greenfield company, you don't have to worry about this so much. You don't have COBOL systems, and you don't have Power Builder applications, and all these things that quite honestly, are getting harder and harder and more difficult and challenging to manage or to find expertise to even be able to support or maintain, make changes to in order to stay current with regulatory modifications, even tax updates. We at Accenture, from a modernization standpoint, obviously, since our clients are typically the very largest enterprises, this is a huge part of our business. And for me, I was running that group now for a couple of years, and it's something that I remain very passionate about, and that's where I want to bring in open source and how we apply it to actually solve problems. But the way I like to discuss that is to really talk about it in terms of technology and enterprise debt. So, yeah, it's funny. I believe that Harry was talking about the Americans printing money. Well, I actually believe that Fortune 2000 companies, they print applications. Let's face it, when you go into the average Fortune 2000 company and you talk to them about, well, tell us a little bit about the business systems that you have that run your back office, that run your enterprise or organization. Typically, we find that there's at least 1,000 different applications. And the reality is, they don't need all of them. They don't even need half of them usually. We usually find very simply that about a third of them are actually redundant right off the bat. I was working with a client not too long ago as a utility, kind of a mid-size utility, let's say a mid-size large utility in the US. And they have 2,800 applications to run their enterprise. Remarkable. And these are not, backup software and stuff. These are real business systems. And they were struggling mightily. They would get regulatory changes to make tax adjustments, or they would get requests from their constituency or from their stakeholders to add new business functionality. They'd have to change 10 systems to do it, because that functionality existed in 10 different systems. This utility was a conglomerate of other little utilities that have been collected over 15 years. And you know what? There's a lot of businesses, a lot of big companies that have grown up just that way through merger acquisition. They kind of forgot the whole post-merger integration type thing. So they've become these collectors, essentially, of systems. And they're very successful organizations in spite of this. But now, they're finding it as these barriers to entry. So we just talked about how much easier it is for new competitors to enter the market, and a lot of times, because open source or cloud really lowers that barrier to entry. They're finding themselves having to be much more nimble than they ever have been in the past. And these custom back-end legacy systems that they have, they're the biggest inhibitor for them to be able to be nimble and be able to be responsive into the market the way that they want to be. So we're faced with a dilemma here. We've got this, what we often refer to as an austerity trap, where it's too expensive to pull all these things out. The sunk cost of these systems is often billions of dollars, and they also can't afford to do nothing. So there's an answer that's out there, and it's not one that's sort of abundant or something that you look at and say, oh, well, that's just an easy fix for this. It's usually a very difficult and challenging roadmap and plan to go through it. But let's talk about how people approach problems like this, and I like to do that with a little bit of a history lesson. This is one of my favorite stories, and I was warned by my colleagues here that I've shared some of these things before in a U.S. audience, and people go, who? And they said that, well, in the European audience, you're more likely to find out that most people actually know who this is. So this is a map of kind of the known world about 300 BC or so. And in 300 BC, there's all these warring factions around the world. It's a very difficult place to be. And in Persia, in particular, there was, I think there's a pointer on here somewhere, but in Persia, which is kind of in the dead center there was a man, and his name was Midas, and he was taking his cart around Persia looking for a place to live, and eventually found this place called Gordian. And I know a lot of people have probably heard this story, so I'll spare you all the history details that I sometimes share with it. He basically hitched his wagon into this particular town. Apparently there was an oracle there, not the oracle that you guys think is the database company. There was an oracle there who said, well, I had foreseen that a man will come to this town riding in a cart, and he'll be the king of this town for a long time. As a symbol of his whatever magnanimity, he tied his cart up to a there it sat. He tied this really elaborate knot. And there was a prediction that was made. It said, the person that will untie this knot will become the king of all Asia. And that legend sort of grew over time, like many legends do. There was a guy, his name was Alexander the Great. And I read the other day that Alexander the Great actually had Aristotle as a tutor. And I can't imagine that there's probably a better educator for someone. But, so Alexander the Great had heard about this. He was actually camping on one of his crusades. He was in the mid-20s or so. He was camping somewhere in Persia outside of Gordon. He said, I think I should probably go into town and check out this knot, because if I untie it, I'm going to be the king of Asia. It's foreseen by the oracle. And again, not the oracle you guys are thinking about. So what he does is he heads into town and he takes a look at this knot. He says, my gosh, that's quite a knot. And it's not very well done here, but this is a painting that's it's actually hanging in a museum in Baltimore, from what I hear, but it's by an Italian guy in the 15th century. And he's trying to depict here is that there's Alexander the Great there looking at this knot. And I think that everybody in here knows what happened. And Alexander the Great pulled out his sword, he cut the knot in half, and the two ends kind of fell out of it, and voila, he decided that he was going to be the king of Asia. But the lesson here is what's important. Because everybody else who had looked at this for years and years while this legend grew and grew, they looked at the knot and tried to untie it and were unable to. And I think that the real challenge here that we're faced with, if we put this in the context of our application portfolios and looking at them, these thousands of interconnected applications like what I showed you with my enterprise architecture, is you just got to take a contrarian view to fix these kinds of things. And that's exactly what Alexander the Great was trying to do here. So we look at that from Accenture's standpoint, and I think that many of you who've worked in a big corporation may have seen some of these things as application portfolio transformation. So how do we take these really complex, difficult systems and networks of applications and turn them into something that's more nimble, more agile, more able to be responsive to a business's needs and requirements? And that's the work that Accenture's been doing in this space for a couple of years now, and I'm going to share with you a couple of examples of how we do this and what results that we've actually seen. The cool thing here is a lot of times you can do this with stuff you already have. There's some really expensive products that are out there in the market, some really good ones that can help you with these things called portfolio management. You know what you need? You need a good spreadsheet with some smart people, and you need some contrarian thinking. Come up with a really good plan. You can use open source to help create the chemical reaction necessary to make this work, because there's a low barrier to entry. And you can ride that theme of agility and cost reduction to help you get started. And I'm going to tell you how. So this is the way that we look at it. When you're looking at this massive hairball of systems, how do I actually get started with something like that? And the key is to pick off a couple of low-hanging fruit things and build some momentum early. That sounds so much like common sense, but it confounds people to get started on this thing. How do we actually start decommissioning some applications? How do we start doing this? Accenture is working with a big postal agency in the world, and I won't tell you which one. Let's say 5 years ago, they had 2,400 applications that ran their business. When we looked at their application portfolio, it was almost 70% redundant. It means that about 1 in 4 of their applications basically, 3 out of 4 of their applications basically had a functional equivalent somewhere else in their enterprise that could have entirely run it. And you know what? It was okay. It was not killing them. But you know what? They also were having to raise their postal rates. They're causing all kinds of problems. They're not able to be responsive to regulations or all the other things that were out there, and it was hurting them very badly. Market presence and others, and there were new entrants in the markets that were causing them problems. So this agency asked us to come in and say, what can you do to help us? And there are two key things that I think we did here. The first one is well, let's start by not looking at the trees. We're going to look at the forest. So let's look at the whole thing. Let's look at the whole portfolio. Let's develop a plan. Because if we don't do that, we don't have a plan. A failure to plan is actually a plan to fail. We realized that, and this client was smart enough to figure that out as well. So we developed something that was a really good roadmap, followed a lot of these principles. And then we started looking at each one of the trees. And you know what one of the first things that we did? One of the first things that we did was, geez, you've got this big IBM mainframe. Is Harry still in the room? You got this big IBM mainframe. And it's costing you a lot of money. But it only costs you a lot of money in December. This is crazy. And by the way, you have all these other applications that support it. Why does it only cost you a lot of money in December? Well, it's because everybody and their brother are shipping presents to people, and they're checking the package tracking application all the time and saying, oh my God, has it been delivered yet? Is it going to get there before December 25th? We took that application and we moved it to IFL. So you heard Harry talk about what Eurocontrol is. We actually did that a couple of years ago for a big postal agency. We moved that application over to IFL, to Linux, basically running on a mainframe. Incredibly cheaper than running it on the base operating system, running on ZOS. Doesn't count towards general purpose MIPS and otherwise. And we went through every application, their portfolio, and developed a disposition recommendation for all 2,400 of them and what to do. 5 years later, we have 600 applications. They're leaner, they're meaner, and they're able to be more responsive to the market. And they also haven't had to raise the rates in a couple of years as well, which is actually a pretty good feat these days. So when we look at these things, we try to look at every single one of these applications over time and say, do we replace this thing? Should we retire it? By the way, for any of you who's ever done any retirement or decommissioning, it's the most deceivingly complex thing I've ever run into. Consolidating applications, those three applications I talked about actually being functionally equivalent, how do you consolidate them? There's engineering tools that can help you do that. It's not easy, and it's a lot of hard work, but you have ways to do that. Remediating is one of my favorites. Back in 2008 and 2009, for those of you that were around, looks like most of us were probably around that time frame, there's a big financial crisis that hit. And a lot of clients, including this one, said, whoa, stop. We're not going to put in that big packaged application. There's a big financial crisis. We're not going to write the big checks right now. And they look back at their legacy portfolio and they said, geez, now what? Because they hadn't done any maintenance on it in years. They're just thinking, we're going to replace this thing. Why would we do that? What do we need to do to extend its useful life? Having the ability to go in and actually clean and shine and do some remediation on it, maybe service enable it, and give it a few more years of useful life is a really important aspect of any thorough application portfolio transformation plan. Platforming, one of my favorites. We do a lot of this. We move a lot of things off of mainframes. We move a lot of things off of legacy Unix. I never thought I would actually call it legacy Unix, but I am now. I think there was two ways to this. The first one was back in 2002, 2003 or so. There was a lot of Unix to Linux migrations. A lot of banks and others did it. We're in wave 2, and it's just starting right now. In the past 2 weeks, without revealing anything that's internally going on at Accenture, I've got no fewer than 20 different opportunities that come up where clients are asking us to move their entire AIX portfolios, their entire HQX portfolios, all of their Solaris environments, hundreds and hundreds of servers over into Linux. It's over. People are all adopting these things and are all moving. So we'll call this the latecomers and how they're doing. And then we've got the migration. And this is the one that I think is really innovative, and I think people in here are going to be excited about what we're doing in this space. So let's talk about a little bit about transformation in practice. You've heard me talk about the concept of innovation and using these things differently, and I really believe this. I think that the proprietary tool sets that are out there, we would never have the success. We wouldn't be able to cut down the portfolios like we've been able to in the applications and help our clients become more nimble, more agile in the marketplace if we didn't have the innovation that was enabled by open source. If we can't go in there and uniquely tool that to do some really special things. Now I'll talk about that more in just a second. Automating. I was in a competitive situation not too long ago with another client, a client situation where they wanted us to migrate a bunch of applications, again, Unix to Linux migration. In this case, it was Solaris migration. Which, by the way, if anybody here has not done that, is not easy. There's a lot of challenges in doing that. But one of the things that we've done over time is we've actually taken, all right, well, hang on, we've learned some things about this. And by the way, this is not rocket science. Anybody can do this. We can learn some things about this, and we can actually automate large pieces of this migration. We can go in, we can fix the Informix 4GL, we can fix the stuff inside of COBOL that doesn't work right, and C, and all the other things, so that when we move it, it's automatically done for us, or at least 90% of it is. That pattern matching, it's like witchcraft to people. This is the kind of stuff that we got to think about if we're going to continue the momentum and adoption of open source. And I think one of the things that we bring to the table when we're talking to clients that says, look, this isn't as bad as you think. You're not going to have to hire 1,000 programmers to do it. And by the way, in this competitive situation, that's what our competitor was proposing. We're going to bring in 1,000 people, and we're just going to have them crawl through all of your code and fix it. Client don't want anything to do with that because human beings are the most error-prone things on the planet. They wanted nothing to do with that. They wanted something that was actually going to automatically migrate most of what they had. And they loved the concept of having captured those rules and continue to adopt it and embrace it over time. The second area I want to talk about here is migration. So, a few years ago, has anybody here done any development in Visual Basic? Anyone? I'm sure there's a few folks. Hey, I got one right there. Anybody else? So Power Builder, Gupta. Anybody done anything with these things? COBOL? COBOL? Yeah, a few of those in here. Do you know how hard it is to find people to maintain those languages these days? And how expensive it is? And how inflexible they are? You know, so many of our clients look at that and they say, we've got this huge problem. We have, you know, an aging portfolio. We've got a set of applications that isn't able to respond the way we want to, and even when we want to make changes to it, we don't have the talent to be able to do it. What are we going to do about those things? For a couple of years now, Accenture's been working with a commercial software provider, as well as with some open source things like Antler and Rue, to actually take that code and might be able to migrate it to either C# or Java or whatever you want. You can do it with legacy Java as well, if there is even such a thing. I think there is. What's different here is, has anybody ever done any COBOL to Java conversion before? Do you know what you get when you do line-by-line conversion of COBOL to Java? Anybody? JOBOL? Get it? My wife doesn't think that's funny either. That's okay. JOBOL is this procedural Java that any Java programmer would look at it and go, what is this? I can't do anything with this. And the problem with those things is they weren't looking at the forest, they were looking at the trees. The way that we approach this using some nice parsing tools like Antler and what Spring Rue is capable of doing is to actually extract that basically into a UML model we can now forward engineer new applications from. You know what? Doing that with platform as a service systems now too. So we can do that with OpenShift. I can take, or I can do it on Spring or whatever target architecture I want. I can take your legacy Java, your legacy Visual Basic, your legacy Power Builder, I can run it using open source tools to understand what that application does, and I can generate a whole new application that's entirely open source, it's entirely standards driven, and it fixes a lot of the evils that they have buried under the covers. This technology works, and it works really well. Just gotten done doing it for a utility company. We've just started doing it for a big oil major. And you know what? I'm going to start doing it for an insurance company in just a few more weeks. We're working in our emerging technology practice on things just like this to try and fix these application portfolios. And if we didn't have open source to be able to help us do these innovative things, we wouldn't be able to fix these problems. There's no doubt in my mind. The final one is around replatforming at scale. And it's remarkable to me that there still are clients out there that have hundreds, if not thousands, of AIX servers. And without revealing them, there's one in particular that we work with for the past couple of years. In fact, we just started their rollout in Asia that had a lot, let's say a lot of retail locations. And at each one of these retail locations actually had in the back storeroom, had an AIX server. They didn't have a problem with IBM hardware, that stuff worked fine. They had a problem with AIX because it wasn't meeting sort of the flexibility or the cost structures or the other things that they were looking for over time. You know what? They had almost 10,000 of these boxes. 10,000 servers.